Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong. This is part 6 of my 12-part video series on the myth of the ADHD child. This video is entitled, Is it ADHD or all boy behavior? Let me preface this presentation by saying that I do believe that ADHD symptoms exist, but I believe after 50 years of studying this issue, that the hypothesis that there is a specific medical disorder called ADHD that's causing these symptoms is wrong, and that there are many other points of view that can account for these symptoms. In part 1 of this video series, I explain exactly why I call ADHD a myth. In this video, I look at ADHD from the standpoint of normal gender differences. First, some statistics. Almost 13% of males will be diagnosed with ADHD sometime during their lives, compared with less than 5% of girls. Right away, this should get people thinking, why are so many boys diagnosed with ADHD? The explanation usually given by ADHD experts is that girls are underdiagnosed, often because they have the quieter version of ADHD, displaying what are called internalizing behaviors, such as forgetfulness, daydreaming, and lack of organization. But even with this explanation, it seems curious to see such a wide disparity in diagnoses between boys and girls. I'm going to suggest in this video that there are more boys than girls labeled ADHD because normal male behavior is often confused with the symptoms of ADHD. That what used to be called all boy behavior is now pathologized and seen as symptomatic of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Let's look at some normal gender differences between boys and girls at play. Keep in mind that I'm speaking generally and that there are plenty of girls who play in ways similar to boys and boys who play in ways that girls do. But on average, these distinctions that I'm going to outline apply to each gender. Research suggests, for example, that boys tend to change activities more often than girls. You've probably noticed this in your own household. Who changes channels the most when watching television, the males or the females? A boy's attention span moves more quickly, at least as far as it's observed by his outer behaviors. Girls, on the other hand, tend to stay with one activity for a longer period of time. It was a girl, for example, that caught Maria Montessori's attention one day when she was totally absorbed in the task of working with Montessori's famous materials. Regardless of outer stimuli, the girl kept on playing. At one point, Montessori even picked the girl up and moved her with her materials to another part of the room, and she still continued to play. You can read about this in Montessori's book, The Secret of Childhood. Boys tend to play more with vehicles and weapons. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who has observed boys at play. They love monster sports cars and trucks and demolition derbies and crashing things together with lots of action and movement and excitement. Girls, on the other hand, generally prefer playing with dolls and domestic toys. This is a quieter and less disruptive form of play. For the most part, you don't see girls smashing two dolls against each other or having dolls race each other across the floor. As the previous examples demonstrate, boys play more actively, more physically. They may prefer playing outdoors where there's more space and more permission to act physically. And by the way, by play, I don't mean competitive sports like soccer, but the free play that kids engage in spontaneously when they have the chance. And I should say parenthetically that they have less and less opportunity to play like this in today's technologically supercharged society. Girls tend to play more verbally and domestically. Here's a girl applying lipstick to another girl. Girls also like to play dress up, play house, play with miniature dolls in doll houses and the like. Keep in mind that there's a lot of gender stereotyping that goes on in our culture, accounting for these differences, in spite of our trying to change these fixed beliefs about gender differences. I'm not saying that these differences are okay or that we shouldn't be doing something about them. I'm just pointing out that the research suggests that when in free play situations, boys tend to play differently from girls. Just as the image you see in the background makes plain, boys tend to hit, trip, and push each other 4 times more often in playful ways than girls. This is called rough and tumble play. It's a good thing, and unfortunately it's not nearly as common as it used to be in our culture. One neuroscientist, Jack Panksepp, claims that the decline of rough and tumble play in our culture is tied to the rise in the incidence of ADHD. That rough and tumble play actually helps develop the frontal lobes, which is the part of the brain that's seen as problematic in kids diagnosed with ADHD. Girls, on the other hand, tend to spend more time engaged in play activities that involve nurturing and kindness. Here you see girls helping each other as they engage in a play scenario. Finally, boys tend to respond more to nonverbal sounds. Boys, for example, are more likely to be drawn to the window in a preschool or kindergarten if a fire engine goes racing down the street. Girls, on the other hand, are more likely to respond to verbal sounds, such as the teacher's voice. So when you look at this list, who would you say the average preschool, kindergarten, or elementary school classroom is set up for? Girls who stick with one activity longer, who enjoy sharing nurturing behaviors, and who relate to others more frequently through verbal interactions? Or boys who like to change activities more often, engage in rough and tumble play, and interact with vehicles and weapons? I think you can see how the typical primary or elementary school classroom favors girls over boys. And that may go a long way toward explaining why there are 3 times as many boys identified as ADHD as girls. When we look at brain development, these differences become easier to understand. Here you see in the bottom graph the volume of gray matter in the brains of boys and girls from the ages of 4 to age 22. The arc for the boys is in black, and you can see that the arc is quite a bit higher in terms of brain volume than the girls. Now, when it comes to brain volume, less actually means more in terms of gray matter. In early development, the brain goes through a process of pruning or elimination of excess synaptic connections between brain cells. These connections send signals throughout the brain. This pruning results in a more efficient and productive brain. So girls, according to this graph, are showing that they have more efficient brains than boys starting fairly early in life. Now let's think about this brain maturation of girls in terms of emotional self-control, or the ability to restrain one's impulses. Remember that impulsivity is one of the 3 cardinal symptoms of ADHD. You can see that girls' impulse control is consistently higher than boys from ages 10 to 25. And notice the yellow circles. They suggest that the impulse control of a young man at age 24 or 25 is equal to that of a girl at age 10 or 11. Pretty mind-blowing, eh? Now let's juxtapose all that we've been saying so far with statistics on the number of females versus males teaching in preschool and primary school. As you can see, there's an overwhelmingly large percentage of female teachers in these classrooms. Females with their own behavior expectations based on their particular female perspectives. By high school, there's more of a parity between males and females, and then more men than women teachers at the university level. But in the early grades, when kids' attitudes are being formed and when most kids get identified as having ADHD, it's overwhelmingly female teachers who are making the phone call to the parent about problem behavior, which can lead to a referral to a doctor who then diagnoses ADHD and prescribes Adderall or some other drug. This system seems to be stacked against normal male behavior. Research also suggests that mothers are by far more involved in the process of taking their child to the physician, getting the ADHD diagnosis, and then advocating for appropriate ADHD interventions for their child. Fathers tend to be what one study called reluctant believers or tolerant non-believers, and tend to be generally absent from the research and clinical literature on ADHD. So again, we're seeing females as the primary movers and shakers in terms of getting their male children diagnosed with ADHD. I want to conclude with these words from Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter Natalie Angier, who wrote in the New York Times, quote, "Today the world is no longer safe for boys. A boy being a shade too boyish risks finding himself under the scrutiny of parents, teachers, guidance counselors, child therapists, all of them on the watch for the early glimmerings of a medical syndrome, a bona fide behavioral disorder. Is he fidgety, impulsive, disruptive, easily bored? Perhaps he's suffering from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, the disease of the hour and the most frequently diagnosed behavioral disorder of childhood." How many boys would lose their ADHD diagnosis overnight if they were just regarded as behaving according to the old dictum, boys will be boys? I'll leave you with that question. For more information about gender differences in ADHD and other themes of this video series, see my book, The Myth of the ADHD Child, 101 Ways to Improve Your Child's Behavior and Attention Span Without Drugs, Labels, or Coercion. It's available through online stores like Amazon, national chains like Barnes & Noble, and independent bookstores worldwide. It's also available as an audio recording on Audible. And make sure to watch my other videos in this series on YouTube. Thanks so much for listening and watching.